Market news now. Stocks in Asia were mixed as shares in Hong Kong led losses among the region's major markets. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index slipping 1.4%. Mainland Chinese stocks closing lower. Shares of Chinese property developers in Hong Kong fell. Looking at what's happening in Europe, European markets were little changed as investors assessed corporate earnings reports and the latest policy decisions for major central banks. Stock futures were muted in early morning trading ahead of the highly anticipated October jobs report. Investors are waiting the release of the October non-farm payroll numbers, and according to the Dow Jones, the consensus estimate calls for 450,000 jobs to be added. To talk to us about the trading week that was and what next week could have in store for us, we are joined by Warwick Lucas from Galileo Capital. Warwick, thank you so much for your time. Let's check in on the JSE at this particular point. A whole host of stuff happening in the background. How are we faring?
Okay, so I think it's in terms of what's been going on there, to me, the most interesting developments have obviously been that we sort of finally moving off our on-hold position that we had ahead of elections, and that obviously meant that we had a rand that was on the back foot, and that obviously cascaded through into the likes of both the rand positive and the rand negative kind of stocks. So I mean, you had obviously minings that have been that like a weaker rand, but obviously they're also watching the commodities markets, and then we have the likes of your banks and so on that generally prefer a firmer rand. Ditto the retailers, of course, which have I think led the categories of those that are reporting this week.
So there have been a lot of company, events come out, especially on SENS, whether we're talking trading reports and results. But overall, were there any company news that caught your attention, be it today or in the past week?
So I would say that for me, the most interesting is really how your quite cyclical stocks are responding to the environment. I mean, if we look at the likes of Massmart, which obviously always was in a turnaround situation, Mr. Price, generally they're showing signs of some quite nice post-COVID recovery coming through here. We also look at Redefine, again an interest rate sensitive situation there, looking like perhaps distributions can come back on the table. And so all of that, pretty positive news. MTN, in a good result there, but I think that is not unexpected. Of course, big demand for bandwidth and cell phone usage in the last little while. But obviously good that they're continuing to maintain the momentum that they've developed.
So when you look at China, it seems as though the regulation aspects we were all worried about seem to be abating, creating some relief for global investors. However, at the back of your mind, do you still see potential concerns when you look at China?
I mean, the biggest issue there was that it was so, shall we say, out of the blue. It was real command and control stuff. So politicians basically saying my word is the law, which is obviously something that can make investors extremely skittish. So what we've seen is that government has now started to codify the kind of institutional changes that they want. That provides a lot more certainty. It provides a framework that businessmen can operate in. But obviously, it'll take a while for the earlier kind of description that I made of politicians playing king to fade. I suppose over time it'll fade and perhaps back to business as usual.
So let's move things stateside and look at the Fed. Some have described it as the longest wait in terms of when we will hear news as to whether Fed Chair Jerome Powell has been extended to continue, being in charge of the Fed. Are there any concerns from your end, as in the case that perhaps a new person, it might be too soon to break the continuity that we're seeing? We are still dealing with inflation and the jobs market and everything else in between. Or where are you seeing things?
I certainly think that presidents are fairly hesitant to make changes. Markets can certainly take a early change in in Fed chairman quite badly. At the moment, I think there's the amount of lobbying that's going on really is just a chance for those with relatively little responsibility and accountability to weigh in and shout their mouths off. But I would consider it quite strange if Biden was to replace Powell, especially since there really aren't a lot of complaints in terms of all of the relief that Powell has provided and the stability he's provided under very trying circumstances. So I would consider it strange.
Warwick, thank you so much for your time. That is Warwick Lucas from Galileo Capital, giving us his take on the markets and what has been happening over the past